This is Joe Zanola with Zanola Company, welcoming everyone to today's webinar, Discover Your Community's Best Future. This is a series that we kind of like this name, and we're going to, I think, return to this theme that when we are able to do research for communities, for cities, for counties, places like that, it becomes public record what we do, and we're actually able to share more information of all the hard work and stuff we get to do behind the scenes than when we do it for a private client. So one level, we get to share some additional information. The other is just some fascinating things we've been working on, and this gives us a chance to share those with you so you know more about what we do and also learn some things that may help you in your business endeavors. In Zanola Company, in alliance with a team of others, which included Market Graphics Research, the Alabama Center for Real Estate, Walker Engineering, a number of folks that I'll show you at the end of this program, we've been involved in doing a series of studies and analysis for the city of Tuscaloosa since 2011, and University of Alabama, powerhouse kind of factor within the city of Tuscaloosa. Tuscaloosa had just some tragic disaster in spring of 2011, which was followed a couple weeks later by the tornadoes in Joplin, Missouri. And so there's lots of things going on there. We've done a very thorough look at a number of aspects related to housing, economic development, growth in the city of Tuscaloosa area associated with or following the 2011 tornadoes through current projects. Today we're going to show you something, insights into kind of student housing trends and planning that we learned through our work with the city of Tuscaloosa. I'm going to make sure that you are seeing my screen move, which you are. Sometimes I do these and they pause. I have it on pause and I'm doing a good conversation. Everybody's looking at one slide. I thought I'd start this off by showing you kind of the four areas that we've identified that we do our core research studies in. You know, the foundation that most people know us for is our ongoing market graphics work, which is an audit of all new home building in three months out of a year. My company, Zanola, does that in 3 markets in Missouri. I'm part of the network that does it in 20-something states, lots of markets. And we have become a resource for those other states to provide different types of custom studies. One is related to new homes, the other is related to multifamily, commercial retail development type research, and then for governmental entities. One of the fun things about the work with Tuscaloosa has been, that we've been able to kind of pull all 4 of those in and have done a total housing needs analysis, low-income housing, multifamily, student housing, retail and business formation, and new homes focus also. We've learned from doing these a lot more than we would for doing just one, and it's one of those things where the sum of the parts is much greater than just the number of those parts. If we move to the part on student housing, we're going to first look at something in the United States that has to do with student age groups. This thing that we have grown up with, living through the baby boom, the baby bust, and the echo boomers, or however you want to categorize us by ages, becomes really apparent in types of housing. And among those appearances, really in terms of student housing. This is a age trends of the U.S. population kind of arranged by different age groups, 0 to 4, and then we've kind of brought everything together for every 10 years after that. If you look at, and this is the total United States, that the kind of the percentage growth that's going to occur between 2000 and 2018. So go all the way back to 2000 census and take where we are currently, project for 2018, that the total population will grow by 13.5%. What we're showing below that is essentially each of those age group strata, the percentage of growth that's occurring over that period of time. And you'll see there's actually, population lost by migration into that age group of 35 to 44s, and we've talked about that in terms of an area of kind of a lot of homes built for that age group, that those homes were built for have grown older, and there's not enough that's done behind them. But what's most interesting about this, if you take this percentage, 13.49, and we advance it forward and put some shading on here, the growth rates that are above that rate are all 55 and above, and all those that are below that rate are below that. Now, what we feel like has happened is we've just kind of brought a lot of the baby boomers and older kids through that age group. They're kind of moving on into these other age groups, and we have a less dynamic population growth in the age groups that would be going into college. So we're kind of setting that up to kind of understand what's going on with the age group population for college students needing student housing. Before I go any farther, one of the reasons that we got involved in looking at the student housing situation in the city of Tuscaloosa is that at the same time and following the 2011 tornado impacts, losses associated with those, there was an increasing momentum for building student housing. It was being fueled by increasing student population and just seemed a very attractive haven for housing investment. It was kind of the darling of the favorite of all types. It performed well, all those things. And in many cases, the more prominent the university, the faster growing the university, the more proactive in growth and all those things, the more student housing that it was occurring, to the point that there was a concern in the city of Tuscaloosa over, are we overbuilding student housing? As we approached that, and we took those last numbers we had in terms of the growth rates by ages, we essentially took the United States, which we were looking at, and say, okay, we're kind of zeroing down on Alabama, and although the University of Alabama's most of its growth is from outstate, let's look at the kind of the composition, the trends of the student population compared to the total population. So the top bars on these are every 10, or the kind of the census or census estimate or projection periods to look at the growth trends of the population, and relative to that, within that, the percentage of those that are student age. We look at those, we see they're comparable. There's nothing out of line between the U.S. and the state of Alabama. Then as we get into looking at Tuscaloosa, and we were doing the student housing as part of a total multifamily housing needs analysis. It was a big component, but part of it. But we found that about 30% of the housing needs for students and population in the city of Tuscaloosa are multifamily, and we take that multifamily, essentially the demographics needs for that, and divide that between student housing and traditional low-income apartments. Found that the the stuff that would be categorized as kind of strictly student housing was 8,200. And we've got a number of other things in here that, because of losses and increases and changes in population, that we had to create some adjustments. One of the things that we had always encountered and had dealt with it in terms of a comment was really the ability to utilize census data as a reliable, is really a true reliable indicator and quantification of population households in certain types of communities. And those had to do with communities that essentially had a large amount of residents that were not counted in the census population. We call those non-census residents, or the total of those that are living there that are counted by the census, and the total of those that are living there not counted by the census. We've got some ways to figure those out. We call those the total effective population. So that's kind of a steady state ongoing thing. It can be a resort area, it could be a college town, it can be an army base, it could be a surprising number of places that really have a greater amount of demand for everything from housing to healthcare to retail to commerce to everything that can be shown as oversupplied based on the undercounted number of residents when it's factored against the census number. So that's what we were dealing with in Tuscaloosa. And then there was the tornado. Tornado removed thousands of houses, thousands of households. And that occurred in 2011, probably the most challenging year it could have occurred in terms of having accurate counts from the census. So, for example, if you would look in the couple of mile long swath of the area through the center of Tuscaloosa, where the tornado went through and just ripped out housing, and there's virtually very few people living there that have been able to kind of rebuild, and that process is ongoing. You look at the physical reality of that on site from Google Earth, from wherever, and it's like, well, nobody lives there anymore. They must have moved someplace else. Well, you looked at the surviving moved someplace else. They hope to rebuild all those things. Then you go to the census and you create the polygon for that census tract. You look at it and it shows just a steady amount of growth, like nothing's ever occurred there. That's a census methodology. So within this situation for the city of Tuscaloosa, we had that really quandary that became fascinating to find a number of different factors to be able to identify the dynamics that the census was not reporting, and then to drive it to all those sectors, those different segments of housing, one of those being student housing. So now back to student housing. One of the things we looked at was the growth trends that had occurred for the last 10 years in the SEC conference. Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, all of those most of them we had numbers for to see what was going on, and you can see there's been growth trends for all of those, and certainly the different measurements, but they all had significant growth. If you just think from 2003, then 10 years, a university like the University of Alabama had a population or a student enrollment increase from 20,000 to 34,000. That is a significant clip, just a significant. Auburn 23 to 24. So there's different rates, but you could see just the phenomenal amount of growth that the University of Alabama had that required student housing. In this chart, what we did is we essentially looked at the enrollment numbers and the student housing beds, and those student housing beds have been added per year just to see how we were keeping up and everything. And then we said, well, look, let's really look at this. Is there a steady state within this in the types of growth that we're having, that there's actually a predictable demand for student housing, and they call it a demand for housing, student housing. It's a bed. It's not a bedroom. It's not a unit. It's a bed. So the number of beds or bedrooms, individuals using that, kind of remained at a relatively steady pace in the low to mid 60 percentiles. We thought that was just very interesting that regardless of what the growth was, and that there's time, the quantitative growth, that the percentage remained relatively, from this viewpoint, relatively stable. When we looked closer, there were times that we could find that there were shortages and new supplies coming on board, which still over time averaged it all out, but could account for some of the dips and increases based on just really the availability of supply. What we did after that was begin to drive through a number of charts to come up with really what was needed and not needed in terms of multifamily units. Then we applied those to kind of what was going on with student enrollment what we thought would happen going forward based on the trajectory of past University of Alabama growth compared to what the U.S. college-age population growth rate would be. Now, what we were coming up against while we were doing this was this trajectory of growth that had essentially what we did is we projected forward the rate of growth for the University of Alabama that we had picked up prior. Remember that I showed you 20,000 to 34 in 2013? That's this line just going forward. And this is the U.S. college age growth rate. So you can see that, well, there's really just this phenomenal separation between what's happening in the U.S. and what has happened at the University of Alabama. What we did is said, okay, we began to forecast a range in between U.S. average and that, saying, the University of Alabama, it's going to outperform the rest of the country in terms of that rate, but don't quite beat seeing it sustainable. A number of reasons for that. The growth rate on that level was dependent on ever-increasing amount of out-of-state tuition at a time that the new generation of parents and college kids becoming a little less inclined to splurge on a college education for the tuition part, and then on the lifestyle. Many people have equated the new generation of student houses that are housing coming on board, the saltwater pools and the massage rooms, being the grandest lifestyle that a college-age student may ever live in, following their getting out of college, based on the reality of the job situation and the amount of money they're going to end up paying back for that lavish, for that living in such nice conditions. So essentially, we projected a range that would take the university now from the 34s to the 37 to 43 range. And what we did was do a number of situations where we began to forecast enrollment required to project to meet the projected growth. So, for example, what we said was that the supply here, this is what we thought, that really the enrollment growth to keep up with the trajectory of current housing construction, that the university would need to be almost 60,000. That if the student housing needs, based on our projection, would be essentially 22,000 beds to 27. But we found out in all this is that really there is, if the university grows at the rate that we foresee it, and compare that to the student housing that is in the pipeline and coming out of the ground now, that we're kind of set and actually oversupplied for a foreseeable future in terms of the number of student housing units that we need. So if this is the University of Alabama forecast, our forecast housing demand, and this is the enrollment growth, this is the percentage of that is the housing demand, and if the rate of student housing continued to grow at the rate it is, it essentially goes way beyond what this demand would be down here. Essentially to the point that every single student in the university, so you'd have to go from that 60-something percent to 100% or greater. One of the interesting things that we were looking at while doing this also was the changes in types of student education. While the university was continuing to grow, it was additionally noted that the type of student was evolving, that the enrollment would grow, but a lot of its growth was anticipated to be remote, non-residential, part-time, all those things that essentially took away from the demand for student housing. And one of the other things that we learned was that in an environment where the demand for student housing begins to grow, continues to grow, that the private sector often is the one, the off-campus, non-university owned housing, is the part that can respond the quickest, get the most up, capture a lot of the population. At the same time, the university is kind of going along and making a decision of the student housing it needs to add, which we're now seeing to come online here at the university as well as others, which is kind of an unfortunate thing because universities themselves with on-campus housing have just this phenomenal competitive advantage, which you would see all to your benefit if you were the university, and somewhat unfair advantage if not. Short version of that story is at this university and many others, there is now a surge of on-campus student housing in an environment where the student housing supply may be at risk of being oversupplied based on surging supply and leveling demand, and that those an additional competitive factor that will just kind of take one for one from the private sector would be the advantage that the on-campus housing would have, as well as the requirement that the on-campus housing could make the campuses could make to really lock down that advantage by requiring more student residency. So what we came up here was essentially a forecast of the growth rates, everything else, and the added student demand that we felt by the bed was high and by the low. And what you see here is if you kind of take the conservative rate, that there's actually no housing needed beyond the next few years, and that is only based on those items that had been started and that were in the ground already, not considering anything that was planned. So hopefully we were able to give some insight to the city of Tuscaloosa, the University of Alabama. It was good news, it was bad news, but it was well thought out and what we thought was a good solid way to drive through and really kind of quantify what the demand had been, to find that measurement of percentage of students that tended to use student housing, to identify the changing demand based on the total demand as well as the changing preferences of demand, and put this together for the city to consider as part of its master planning and usages and permitting and encouragement of student housing. One of the things that we pointed out to the city was that there is no segment of housing that doesn't have the ability to get overbuilt. And when it does get overbuilt, it is not a singly affected segment. If you visit a college town like Tuscaloosa, it's similar in size to Columbia, Missouri, University of Missouri, other towns that are kind of known for being a college town. You begin to notice the size and the scale of the student housing complexes, and they have some pretty remarkably high profit expectations. A few variances in points in terms of occupancies can really turn them a wrong way. So hopefully we're able to head things off here and prevent more overbuilding of student housing than we were foreseeing. We're going to wrap up this today with kind of showing you the people that contributed information to this. Our ACRE team that we essentially assembled by the Alabama Center for Real Estate. Grayson Glaze is the leader of that. Jason Walker is the local Tuscaloosa person. Jason and Grayson were folks native Tuscaloosa that do remarkable work for the city, and also people that were on the ground going door to door the day of the tornadoes. Our colleagues Rob Hale and Jason Hale live in Birmingham, a few miles away from Tuscaloosa, do all the great research on the ground for market graphics in that area. And we're going to thank Rachel Ballard also for being a great contributor to this with Zanola Company. We appreciate your tuning in and always look forward to talking to you again soon, and hope this has been a beneficial webinar for you today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.